Well, good afternoon, everybody. Let's do that again. Ready? Good afternoon, everybody. All right, so I ended up in a little YouTube time vortex a little while back. I'm sure some of you have ended there every once in a while. A video had come up, and I get sucked into the nature videos. Anyone else one of the nature video kind of fan? So if it has like some animals in it, I'm always like, ooh, let me just see that, and then you'll see that, and then you'll see another one. And so that the heading is what has to grab you, right? Because you don't know what it's about. And so this heading was great. It said something like, crow gets surprised while attacking an eagle's nest. And so in my head, the eaglets were there in the nest, and then, the crow came and tried to do some damage, and out of the blue, an eagle was gonna swoop down and just teach that crow to stay away from his eagles. That's what was in my head when I hit play to watch the video. And so there it is. The crow, the little eaglets are there. Eaglets are super cute, by the way. They're like these cute. They're like defenseless and they're beautiful. They're like furry and fuzzy. Anyway, just crow, big crow. Maybe it was a raven even. Kind of drops down on this nest, and I'm like, oh, here it comes, right? And the crow picks at these little eaglets aggressively. And apparently they know what they're doing, because it goes after the face, after the eyes of one of these eaglets, and then it goes for the soft spots, around the throat, and then the belly, he's trying to turn this eaglet over, and he's starting to pick the feathers off and go after the soft spots on this eaglet. And the other eaglets in the nest, they can't do anything, and they're just trying to get away, and so they're crowding over into one side of the nest, and I'm like, man, this eagle better show up soon. This is going pretty dark fast. And then he didn't show up, and then that eaglet stopped moving. And then the crow turns on the next one. He does the same thing. He starts picking it apart, picking at the face, pulling off feathers, going after the soft underbelly, and finishes that one. And this just continues, and no eagle ever showed up. That was it. The thing lied to me. It was terrible. It was so horrible. It was what am I just, I'm damaged. What did I just watch? I can't even believe this. This is so dark, and I'm thinking, this is nature. Nature, now that we broke the planet, nature is brutal. It's just brutal. And God gets me thinking, right? We're in this series on Ruth. And as we got into the story last week, we started thinking about talking about how these were dark days. This was some difficult stuff that was going on. And we have to step back and go, man, this is not the way it was supposed to be. The world isn't supposed to be a place where this guy shipwrecks his family. He goes into a land he's not supposed to be. There's famine in the land. It's not supposed to be that way either. And then he goes and he does, brings his family over there, but he ultimately dies. But it's okay because she's got 2 sons. But then they died. And we're reading this story. We're like, this is terrible. Now this widow is left on her own, and she's got this daughter-in-law who's a Moabitess, and this is a problem in all of its own ways. We'll see that in a couple of weeks. And you look at this, you go, this isn't the way it was supposed to be. Where's the eagle? Where is the eagle that's supposed to swoop in and save the day? Where is the eagle that's supposed to protect the weak and the vulnerable? And just watch the news, right? Just watch the news and you'll see this. You could come up with an endless list. Normally, I write notes and I kind of come up with examples and stuff. I'm like, I don't even need to come up with examples. You could do this all day long. You could find ways that it's not the way it's supposed to be. You get a kid, he's on the playground, he's bullied from this big. First thing, one of their first experiences when they're with other people and they can stand on their feet is they get knocked down by someone. You're like, what? How did that? This isn't the way the world is supposed to be. And it only gets worse from there. I came across a statistic explaining how many women in America have been assaulted in some way. It's heartbreaking. When you see the numbers on poverty and how many people in our own country, just don't even think globally, because that'll just break your heart, in our own country, who don't have enough resources to make it through the week. deciding which meal they won't have today. In our country, around the world, people living on the leftovers, resources being consumed in massive quantities by just a handful of the world's global population. Pollution everywhere. We're running out of fresh water because we can't even figure out how to take care of our own nest. This, you just read it, watch it. When we're in the text, you have to step back and say, this is not the way it was supposed to be. And you're right, it's not. This is now the world that we broke. That we broke in our own selfishness, our own sin, and our own rebellion. And so it's in days like these. You read through the book of Judges, which is the book that is the background, the backdrop for the book of Ruth that we're studying. If you read through the book of Judges, you'll see all of the stuff that you see in the news today. You'll see anarchy breaking out. You'll see racism. You'll see entire people groups being wiped out. All of this horror. You'll see the abuse of women in just unbelievably undescribable ways. This is all sitting in the scriptures. You can see it in the book of Judges, and you can see it in the news today. Dark, heavy, dangerous days. And the people that ought to stand up and do something about it, where are they? Where are they? Nowhere to be found. The crow is picking at all of the soft little spots, and the crows are swarming, and they're picking at the soft underbelly, and they're tearing things apart, and no one is showing up. This is what we see in the book of Judges. That's the backdrop. In fact, last week, by way of summary, we started the book of Ruth, and it said, in the days when the judges ruled in Israel, a severe famine came upon the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah left his home, went to live in the country of Moab, taking his wife, his 2 sons with him. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife was Naomi, and their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. And when they reached Moab, they settled there. That's where the story began, and we saw it unravel last week. I can't go over all the details and do a full review, but from that's where it starts, and all of a sudden, the whole thing starts to unravel for us. When you see this, you go, this isn't the way. The days of the judges, these were dark days. It's not the way it was supposed to be. And when we think about this, we go, well, who are the people that were supposed to show up? And you think, well, it was the people here, right? This was a man from Bethlehem in Judah. He was supposed to show up. He was supposed to take care of business. He was supposed to get things done. But even there, we're starting to get a hint that all is not right. If you go back through Judges and you look at the other people who were from Bethlehem in the land of Judah, that exact phrase shows up a couple other places. It's a sad story. It's a sad story. So when we meet this guy, we're actually not super hopeful at this point because we've already seen what was going on in Bethlehem in the land of Judah. We already know that if you read the book of Judges, please read the book of Judges in the next week or two. Just read through it so you get a backdrop for everything we're talking about here and read it in a day when you're not feeling sad because it's too much. It's too much otherwise. But then that first chapter spirals down, heartache, bitterness, all of this sadness, but it ends with just the tiniest little hint of hope. Verse 22, Naomi returned. This was so cool because this word's so important. The prophets use it of repentance, this word return. So she was turning away from Moab and the mistakes that she and Elimelech had made, and she's returning back to Israel. Now she's saying, I went away full, I came back empty. I'm bitter. I went away Naomi pleasant, I came back bitter and empty. But the narrator has a different story he's trying to communicate to us. He's like, wait a second, but you're turning. You're finally back on track. You're finally coming back to the land of Israel. You're coming back to the people of Israel. You're coming back to the God of Israel. This is a good thing, Naomi. You're returning. And you said you're alone, but you're not alone. You were accompanied by your daughter-in-law, so you're not alone. You're with Ruth, and we're going to find some awesome stuff out about Ruth. So, this is already a good, but the biggest hint of all was that she's returning to Bethlehem. We said last week that Bethlehem, the name itself means the house of bread. So there was irony that there was a famine in the house of bread, but now the barley harvest is beginning. So there's bread in the house of bread again. This is all from last week. I'm just kind of running back a summary in case you missed it. And so this is the backdrop. So will this hope continue? Will this little thread of encouragement and hope actually start to continue? That's the backdrop. I'm going to read the whole of Ruth chapter 2 because I really like it. So here we go. Now, there was a wealthy and influential man in Bethlehem named Boaz, who was a relative of Naomi's husband, Elimelech. One day, Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go out into the harvest fields to pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it." Naomi replied, "All right, my daughter, go ahead." So Ruth went out to gather grain behind the harvesters. And as it happened, she found herself working in a field that belonged to Boaz, the relative of her father-in-law, Elimelech. While she was there, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you," he said. "The Lord bless you," the harvesters replied. Then Boaz asked his foreman, "Who is that young woman over there? Who does she belong to?" And the foreman replied, "She's the young woman from Moab who came back with Naomi. She asked me this morning if she could gather grain behind the harvesters. She's been hard at work ever since, except for a few minutes' rest in the shelter." Boaz went over and said to Ruth, "Listen, my daughter, stay right here with us when you gather grain. Do not go to any other fields. Stay right behind the young women working in my field. See which part of the field they're harvesting and then follow them. I have warned the young men not to treat you roughly. And when you are thirsty, help yourself to the water that they have drawn from the well." Ruth fell at his feet and thanked him warmly. "What have I done to deserve such kindness?" she asked. "I'm only a foreigner." "Yes, I know," Boaz replied. "But I also know about everything you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. I have heard how you left your father and mother and your own land to live here among complete strangers. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully for what you have done. I hope I continue to please you, sir. You have comforted me by speaking so kindly to me, even though I am not one of your workers." At mealtime, Boaz called to her, "Come over here and help yourself to some food. You can dip your bread in the sour wine." So she sat with the harvesters, and Boaz gave her some roasted grain to eat. She ate all she wanted and still had some left over. When Ruth went back to work again, Boaz ordered his young men, "Let her gather right among the sheaves without stopping her, and pull out some heads of barley from the bundles and drop them on purpose for her. Let her pick them up, and don't give her a hard time." So Ruth gathered barley there all day, and when she beat out the grain that evening, it filled an entire basket. She carried it back into town and showed it to her mother-in-law. Ruth also gave her the roasted grain that was left over from her meal. "Where did you gather all this grain today?" Naomi asked. "Where did you work? May the Lord bless the one who helped you." So Ruth told her mother-in-law about the man in whose field she had worked. And she said, "The man I worked for today is named Boaz." "May the Lord bless him," Naomi told her daughter-in-law. "He is showing kindness to us as well as to your dead husband. That man is one of our closest relatives, one of our family redeemers." Then Ruth said, "What's more, Boaz even told me to come back and stay with his harvesters until the entire harvest is completed." "Good," Naomi exclaimed. "Do as he said, my daughter. Stay with his young women right through the whole harvest. You might be harassed in other fields, but you'll be safe with him." So Ruth worked alongside the women in Boaz's fields and gathered grain with them until the end of the barley harvest. Then she continued working with them through the wheat harvest in the early summer. All the while, she lived with her mother-in-law. All right, let's meet some of the characters here. So you have Boaz. Now, this is interesting because in the very first verse here, we meet this guy Boaz, and he's called a wealthy and influential man. But this is a phrase that is an unusual description, and so it's very flexible. It goes in a couple of different directions. But where it's used in the book of Judges, and this is an important background for it, if you see it in the book of Judges, it's kind of a helpful hint that the narrator here in Ruth wants us to make a connection back to the other book. And so in there, it's referring to Gideon. And some of you might remember Gideon. He was called a mighty warrior, but he didn't feel like a mighty warrior. He was actually really scared. And he was addressed. He's like, "You're a mighty warrior." And he's like, "Oh, not really." He was like, No, you're a mighty warrior. You're gonna have to trust me on this one. You're a mighty warrior. And he has faith in God, Gideon, and he does amazing things because he trusted in the strength of God. Boaz is described as a Gideon-like character. Now, we don't think that Boaz fought any actual battles. So what we're led to think about here isn't that he's a warrior out in combat, but he's another type of warrior, another type of influential person who will use his strength and his faith in Yahweh to do great things. Now, the word itself, his name, is also very rare, and that's always kind of an interesting thing, right? Because he doesn't have a common name, and so where else do we see it? Well, in this case, the only other place we see it is in the Temple of Solomon. So one of the great pillars, like this 30-foot tall, 8-foot wide bronze pillar, a column that was like holding up the temple, part of the temple, was named Boaz, because it has something to do with bearing the weight. That's kind of the gist of this. And so the writer is trying to get us to make these connections so that we'll think of Boaz as this warrior-like man who will be able to carry up the weight, lift the weight, the burden in difficult times. He's actually linked to another patriarch named Enoch in different ways I can't really get into, but Enoch ended up being a strong, influential person at a time when society was unraveling. I think all of these connections are woven into the text for us so that we will think of Boaz in that way. So we're hoping that this man from Bethlehem is going to be different from all of the other men from Bethlehem and Judah that we've been meeting up until this moment. Judges 17, Judges 19, Ruth chapter 1 with Elimelech. This is going to be we're hoping this is a different kind of man from Bethlehem. Now, we get Ruth, who in the next two verses we meet. One day Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go out and harvest the fields and pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it." Now this is super kind of a cool thing, because in here you start to see all the activity that is given to Ruth. All of these words of action are given, and this is going to be important later on in the book. But she's just hustling, she's moving, she's taking the initiative. And a whole lot of the good that happens to her is because she's actually taking the initiative. Now, we always see God behind it, but what we see here is the incredible need, the value that comes from someone who is willing to go and get the thing done. And that's Ruth for us here. She's like a great model, a great example of that. But she's picking up the stalks of grain, and this is kind of an odd symbol, an odd picture for us, because we're not farmers, we're not agrarian anymore. So, Chelsea, could you come up and give me a hand here? Come on, just go through there. Yeah, come on. I need a volunteer. You were closer to the curtain. All right, so you are going to represent for me Ruth and the poor. All right, the people in society that would have been most vulnerable. All right, so everyone say hi. Right. All right. Let's give her a hand. Coming up here. I am going to be the landowners in Israel at the day. All right, now, so you guys don't know what, wheat, grain, barley, it means nothing to us. Like, we go and we buy our bread already baked and made. We couldn't do anything. If you gave me a thing of grain, I wouldn't know what to do with it. So we're going to use dollar bills to represent this. So I am a landowner, and I am going to plant my seeds in the ground, and I'm going to hope that they harvest. Now, I'm planting this as an investment in an even greater harvest, but this is my food. This is the food that I'm going to eat. It's the food my family is going to eat. It is also the food that my animals will eat, and it is the food that I will sell, or I will turn into something that I will sell. And so everyone in this day and age would have these fields, and they would go and plant their grain in their fields. Now, the way that when it says that she went to pick up the sheaves, pick up the grain, it's a word called, it's called gleaning. And it's a different type of harvesting. It's called gleaning. And it's found throughout the scriptures that there are these gleaning laws. And this was a brilliant stroke of social justice that we find in the scriptures. Because me, as a farmer, as a landowner, I would go and pay my workers, or I myself would go and I would take my harvest. When this all grew up into even more wealth and resources for me, I would go and start to collect my harvest. Right? And so I'm working hard. You got to work fast because you don't want enemies to come in and steal your harvest, and you don't want it to rot on the vine. But I would want to get every one of my little investments, right? Because why would I leave anything in the field. Why would you do that? I'm not going to leave anything on the table. I mean, you'd be a fool to do that, right? And so what you would want to do is you'd want to rush through the harvest and you'd want to grab everything, and then you'd want to come back and you'd want to make sure you get every little bit, right? So sometimes, you're harvesting and you're moving quick. You could leave some stuff behind. You could leave some stalks behind. And God said, if you do that, once you go through your field one time, then after you get your stuff, you have to leave the rest for the needy in the land. So now you're the needy in the land. So now you come glean behind the harvesters. That's the picture. The harvesters just came through and they grabbed everything they could. And now the people in need, the widow, the orphan, the people who are sick, the people who could not work, you're going to hold on to that. And then go back a little bit, because now as a harvester, I am going to keep going, but I'm moving so fast that occasionally I drop something. And now I want to go back and get it, right? Why would you not? This is money left in the field. That one too. And God says, no, you can't go back and get it. You dropped it, that's not for you anymore. Now here we go, let's go back again, right? And now here's a really fun one. Let's say you're harvesting and you're picking up a whole bunch, right? You bundled it up, you made the sheaves of your grain. Now you put it out in the field in some piles like this. Now I'm gonna come back and get these. And if don't work so close, because I'm still working here, I'm still clearing, I'm still making money, right? This was my money, my resources. This is for me, my family. This is for my animals. This is for my wealth. This is for my future. This is how I'm going to build bigger barns and fill them up. The Bible says that if I'm collecting some of these and I forget a pile in the field, I'm not allowed to go back and get it. That's how beautifully written the Old Testament gleaning laws were, so that the people in need could have abundant access to the food. You couldn't, if you had a field, you'd have to leave the edge of your field. You couldn't harvest to the edge of your field if it was next to a street. Why? So the people walking on the road, the foreigners and the hungry, they could come along and they could pick the gleanings right there. Let's thank Chelsea for helping out. You gleaned it, it's yours. You gleaned it. I'm not allowed to touch it. No, I can't. Like literally God said, no, you gotta, no, I can't. You have to take it. No, Yahweh, I can't. No, I can't. Like you gleaned. I'm not allowed to touch it. No, go. Go do something fun with it. Go give it to someone else. So this is it. You can't, because this is, he told me, you can't. If you leave it, if you drop it, if you anything, that's gleaning. Ruth was saying, if I could find, why was she wondering if she could find someone? If this was the law of the land, because how many people do you think were doing that in the time of the judges? Nobody. They were going through their fields. They were picking up every little bit, every little dollar that would have been theirs. They're not leaving anything for the poor. They're not leaving anything for the people in need. They're not leaving anything. They're going to go through it. They're going to go through it again. They're going to go back again. They're going to go pick their vines, pick all their grapes, make their first wine. Then they're going to go back and pick the late harvest as well. And God says, no, you can't do that. That was my plan. I'm giving you an abundance so that you would leave it for the people in need. That's what she's depending on. When they say she's picking up among the sheaves, these are the big stalks, the big piles of grain. And they're saying, don't get too close. Don't get too close. Yeah, I'm about to come back and get that. No, leave it. It isn't even yours anymore, is the picture that the scriptures get. So that's what is going on. That's the backdrop when it says that Ruth was going to come and glean the stalks of grain that were left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it. Now, the writer also wants us to see something really cool here. When we were back in Ruth chapter 1:1, he said that he talked about the country of Moab. This is the very first chapter, Ruth 1:1. In the days when the judges ruled in Israel, a severe famine came upon it. See, the country of Moab. Now, the word for country, it can go country, it could mean nation, it could mean people, but the word itself actually is the word for field. It's unusual, it can be used in this way, but we translate it as country because Moab was a country, and so we knew that they had traveled to the country of Moab. But it was an unusual way to describe the country of Moab, the land of Moab. But then we find when we get to chapter 2 a field that belonged to Boaz, same word. So the narrator wants us to make this connection that there is a field of Moab and there is a field of Boaz, and they are very different places. In the field of Moab, terrible things happen. In fact, in the fields of Israel, there are terrible things that happen. But whenever you find a place like a field of Boaz, it's a different kind of a place. In that kind of a place, he gives us one more hint as to help us see what it is. This is called a chiastic structure. It's a structure in Hebrew literature that tells us what the author really wanted to highlight. Because remember, they didn't bold or underline or italicize. They didn't have all those cool font features that we have. So they used grammatical structures to show us what really mattered. And so the story begins with an introduction, and it ends with a focus on Boaz. The next section is Boaz is blessed and notices Ruth, and then right at the very end, he's blessed again for having noticed Ruth. Now, here's what's interesting. This structure, sometimes when you're reading the Bible and it feels repetitive, that's because there's a grammatical structure underlying it that you don't necessarily see as readily because we're not as trained to look for these kinds of things. But this is the story repeats itself going out of it. But it points, if you notice, it's like a little arrow. It kind of points to the center. And this is what the author wants you to see. He wants you to see that this is a story of the blessing of Boaz and Ruth, but it's verse 11 and 12 that's the key to the whole of the chapter. So in 11 and 12, this is what we read. Yes, I know, Boaz replied, but I also know about everything you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. He wants us to remember the incredible loyalty that Ruth has shown to Naomi and to her family. I have heard how you left your father and mother and your own land to live here among complete strangers. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you. That's what he wants. He wants us to recognize that here in this moment that Ruth has come under the wings of God, Yahweh. He's come under the wings of Yahweh. That's what she's done. And you look at that and you go, that's so beautiful, that's so sweet that Boaz is recognizing that she's come and she's getting now protected, that God himself is spreading his wings over her. But what we've seen is that it's Boaz who's spreading his wings over her. It's the field of Boaz where she's protected and where she's safe. That's why Naomi tells her, if you're going to be in that field, this is good. Stay there because you'll be safe under his protection. This is where all sorts of good things happen. This is where she's protected even from his own workers, which isn't the case in so many other stories happening at this time. This is the field of Boaz. Boaz is saying, listen, you've come under God. But we see how God is actually affecting this change, how he's protecting her. He's protecting her under the wings of Boaz, a man made for this time, a difficult season in history where he will use his resources and his strength to spread the wings of Yahweh over someone who desperately needs it. And what's so beautiful about this, it's exactly what Ruth did. Ruth spread her wings at great cost and risk to herself. She spread her wings over Naomi. They tell us that some scholars have run the numbers. They say that if she continued with them through the harvest, which is what she was said that she had done, that she will have been able to provide enough food for her and Naomi in the 6 or 8 weeks of the harvest for an entire year. That's what Boaz was able to do, and that's what her work was able to secure for Naomi, who would have ended up destitute as a widow in that day. And yet, here, the wings of Yahweh are spread over this family by the workings of Boaz. Now, what does it mean for us? It means that we can actually create fields of Boaz in our own sphere of influence. So, for instance, he asks her to be rewarded, right? That was one of the things. And so what do we get to do? The same thing, reward people with God's shalom. The word that he uses here is also used in Proverbs 19. So this is who Boaz was, right? He was doing this. Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward them for what they have done. He's saying, God will reward you if you're good to the poor. Boaz turns that around and he tells Ruth, you're going to be rewarded by God for the good that you have done. And it's, of course, Boaz who is doing this. And this word for reward, the root word, the consonants behind it are the same in the word shalom. When he's talking about reward, we tend to think, oh, a reward, I got a reward, I found money, whatever it is. But he's talking about shalom. He's being rewarded with that. That's the Hebrew sense of peace or wholeness. It's the exact opposite of what's going on in the day of the judges. There is a wholeness that he is calling her toward, a fullness of life, shalom, peace, harmony with God and with the creation. And Boaz is saying, yeah, that's what God is going to do for you. And of course, he's doing it through the very work of Boaz. What does she say in verse 13? I hope I continue to please you, sir. You have comforted me by speaking so kindly. This idea of comfort, the word there means to breathe deeply. Think of that. Put yourself in Ruth's position, a young woman. All of the stress and all of the anxiety and all of the fear and all of the risk. Now, take a deep breath. Go ahead with me. Hold and let it go. Feel that, right? A little sense of all of that leaving. The stress, the anxiety, the tension starts to leave. Now, do it again. Ready? Deep breath. Let it go. Ruth has a ton of anxieties, things she could fear, risks that she is taking, responsibilities that she now has. What's going to happen? How is it going to all work out? And Boaz has given her room to breathe. Can you do that? Are there people in your life, in your sphere of influence, the area that you can create a field of Boaz? Are there people who are just, they're barely holding it together, they're holding their breaths? Half of the people I greeted today, I said, hey, how you guys doing? And they said, barely hanging on. I'm hanging on. I'm like they're hanging on, like by your fingernails, right? People need this sense of comfort. Will you comfort people? Give them space to breathe. You can do that. You can create a field of Boaz in your life, in your places of work and hanging out in friendship circles. You can do that. Are you able to give people room to breathe? And then he also dignifies the marginalized. This is such an awesome moment. I told you, remember when we're talking about the gleaning laws, right? And so he actually tells his workers, don't accidentally drop a few things, drop them on purpose. Drop some barley, drop some extra sheaves. And why would he do this? And I think it's because Boaz could have made a big to-do about helping Naomi. He could have packed up a wagon filled with grain. He could have said, hey, Naomi, this will be enough to carry you through the tough season. He could have done it with great fanfare. He could have gone into the village. Dun, 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 look at me. I'm going over to see Naomi. Going to give her some of my wealth. Going to do a transfer of wealth. Coming out of the goodness of my heart. He could have done that. Not at all what he does. Instead, he lets it go through the natural law of things, the order of things, the social justice that God had constructed, this biblical justice system, but he just piles it on for her. He lets her get even more than she would have gotten. So what happens? Imagine, put yourself in that scene. You're Ruth. You come home. Naomi's mind is blown. Ruth, she may not have ever done this. She doesn't know what it's like to glean. She doesn't know how much she's supposed to bring home or not. She probably thinks it's a lot because it would have been very, very heavy for her to even get home by herself. But I think Naomi would have been like, Ruth, thank you. Oh my goodness, look what you've done. You've worked so hard. Glory would have been given to Ruth in this new Ruth and Naomi relationship. But in reality, it was Boaz working behind the scenes with his workers. Only he and a worker would have known that he had told them, drop a few extra things, help him out. He could have taken all of the credit if he wanted to, but instead, he let Ruth take the credit. He dignified her work, and he let her shine in a way that she never would have had he not been giving her dignity. The way we do our work and the way we care for people, to do it in a way that increases dignity. I mean, this is an absolute gift that we can give to the people all around us. And then we can turn ordinary moments into sacred moments. Ordinary moments into sacred moments. He did this at lunch. What would have been just a very normal moment, it's a little break in the middle of the day, he starts turning over all sorts of biases. You would never invite a foreign woman over to your table, certainly not a Moabitess. And he's like, no, come sit with us. Dip bread with me. the landowner. Dip it here with me in the shared bowl. This is a gift. He's raising her status. She was shocked by it. She knew that this was an absolute stunning reversal of what you would have expected, how you would have thought you would have been treated, how she even expected to be treated in that day and age. She was just absolutely blown away by it. Come, roasted grain. He piles it on. His workers and the other people there must have been like, what in the world is going on? We saw this in the life of Jesus too. They regularly take the laws and they push them farther and further. They go deeper, and they interpret them in the most merciful and generous and sacrificial kinds of ways. This is such an incredible model for us. And when I see this, I'm like, this is the kind of a person I want to be. I want to be the kind of a person that can take just a simple moment like a lunch and turn it into a sacred moment. I saw this happening. My mentor, Jim Singleton, he was staying with us, and we were doing some teaching things here on the island, and as one of my mentors, I have learned a lot from him because he's taught me a lot. Like, I've actually learned sitting in classrooms with him, but of course, what I really learned from him is learned by watching his life, right? And so he was in our house. He was coming or going, I forget which it was at the time, and he kind of just attaches eyes with Cheryl for a moment, just a moment, coming, going, whatever it was. And he starts telling her, he's like, Cheryl, I know Robert, he gets like, he's up front, and a lot of people, they'll recognize and they'll talk about it, but I know how much strength he gets from you. And I understand the sacrifices that you have made. This is a greeting. This is like a hello or a goodbye moment. It's just a regular moment. Hundreds of times in your month, you'll do these kinds of things. And he just sees her, and he starts speaking like directly into her soul in some mystical way. And all of a sudden I see her eyes, and my wife is like tough as nails, and I see her eyes starting to get a little tear starts forming. I'm like, what am I watching here? What is this? And he was able to talk right into her. He made an ordinary moment sacred. And I thought, man, I want to do that. I want to be able to do that. I want to be the kind of a person. I want to create a field of Boaz every opportunity I get in these normal, ordinary kinds of moments. And Boaz did all of this while giving the glory to God. He could decrease while the glory of God would increase. All of it. He creates this field. He does this incredible things. He does all of this work. He becomes the very wings of God, all while giving God the fullness of glory. This is a picture. This is the beginning. In this moment, Boaz is the Christ figure. He's the Jesus figure in this story. Ruth, in her own way, is also the Jesus figure in this story. Through great sacrifice, by going without so that others can have, that others can go with, by expending your own energy and your own emotional credits on behalf of others, by taking social risks, by putting it all out on the line, you are able to spread the wings of Yahweh over the people, the most vulnerable people who need it in our day and age. Jesus himself, he used this kind of a language in Luke 13. He says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones God's messengers, how often I have wanted to gather your children together as a hen protects her chicks beneath her wings." Jesus is taking the wings. He is the wings of Yahweh. In his death and burial, his resurrection, the crucifixion of Jesus, his sacrifices, he leaves heaven, comes here, a foreign land. He spreads his wings over the people. And he says, this is what I long to do. This is the imagery we're getting right from the book of Ruth, to spread the wings of God. You are those wings. You're the people who can create a field of Boaz wherever you go. You can do it at your workplaces. Are there people look through the list, take out your cameras, take a picture, find ways this week, apply all of these things. You can do this. You can find ways to take ordinary moments and make them sacred in your neighborhoods. Yeah, it was taking out the garbage, but you could actually make it a sacred moment when you see your neighbor and you bump into them and you see and you dig in, you ask them how they're doing, and you listen and you really see them. You remember a story, you encourage them. You look at your coworkers and how can you do it? Is there a way that you can dignify them? You can raise them up while you fade into the background. You can do that. In the power of the Spirit that we have been given, we are called to be these people who spread the wings of Yahweh over the most vulnerable, over the people who are needing it, over the people who are weak. We are able to protect them. We're able to stop the crows from coming and picking at all of their soft spots. By protecting them, we can show up in these ways. And you can do this every day. You could wake up every morning and say, Jesus, give me an opportunity here, this week, this day, this moment, in the next hours. Give me a moment to create a field of Boaz, to spread your wings, the wings of the Almighty God over the people around you each and every day. This is an absolute blessing, and it is an incredible way to live, my friends. Let's do this more and more. Father, what we need is your encouragement and your inspiration. Lord, you have given us resources. You have given us the emotional energy and credits. Father, you have given us so much, and you are telling us to spread your wings, to cover, to provide a shelter, a protection, to give people resources that they need emotionally and physically. Lord, you are calling us to represent you in this world, to be these kinds of people in the way that Jesus was, and the example that he was to us, and the resources that he has deposited with us, that we could use them, Father, in these ways. Make us these people, Lord, more and more. Inspire us through your word. Encourage us in our souls. We pray, Father, that we would do this, that we would meet you in these moments, that we would bless you as you bless us. We pray it in Christ's name. Amen.